Welcome again to the program. The UK's Defence Ministry says Russia is likely to finally control most of the salt mining town of Soledar, located in eastern Ukraine, following months of fighting in the country. It says not just Russian troops, but the mercenary Wagner group have been making advances towards the town for 4 days. Soledar is near Bakhmut, where Ukrainian forces are currently locked in a bloody battle with the Russian forces as well. A town of Soledar, which initially had a population of around 10,000 people before the war, may be seen as a stepping stone to capturing Bakhmut, and its strategic value is questionable. U.S. officials, however, said last week that founder of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is seeking to control the large salt and gypsum mines in the area. According to the UK, part of the fighting had focused on entrances to the 200-kilometre-long disused tunnels, and that Russia and Ukraine are likely concerned that they could be used for infiltration behind their lines. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, on the other hand, says resilience of Ukraine's forces fighting off waves of attacks in the eastern region of Donbass has helped the country win time and gain strength against Russia. Ukrainian military reports say the country's troops are withstanding heavy attacks by Russian forces redeployed in Soledar after failing to take the larger nearby town of Bakhmut. Zelensky did not spell out what he meant by gaining time and strength, but Ukrainian officials and senior officers have warned that Russia is planning a new major offensive in the coming months.
Ukraine.
Битва за Донбас триває.
The battle for Donbass continues, and although the occupiers have now concentrated their greatest efforts on Soledar, still, the result of this difficult and prolonged battle will be the liberation of our entire Donbass. It is extremely difficult. There are almost no whole walls left. Thanks to the resilience of our soldiers there in Soledar, we want additional time and additional strength for Ukraine. And what did Russia want to win there? Everything is completely destroyed. There's almost no life left, and thousands of their people are lost. The whole land near Soledar is covered with the corpses of the invaders and scarred from the blows. This is what madness looks like. Ukraine must get everything it needs to expel terrorists from our land and to reliably protect our people from any Russian escalation plans.
Постійний терор проти прикордонних громад Сумщини. Постійний терор проти наших людей на окупованій території.
Heading into the war proper now in Ukraine, 2 women have been killed after a Russian missile hit a marketplace in the village of Shevchenkov in the Kharkiv region. 4 other people were wounded in the attack, including a 10-year-old girl. Rescue workers worked through piles of rubble to reach the victims. The missile, an S-300, was launched from Russia's Belgorod region. It left a large crater in the middle of the village. There's been no comment from Russia about it. Meanwhile, this video released from Kherson authorities shows what appears to be a covered body and damaged pavements in the aftermath of Russian shelling there. A message from the Kherson state administration says 1 person died after the Russian shelling on the city. On Sunday, President Volodymyr Zelensky issued fresh denunciation of what he said was Russia's failure to observe a truce it proclaimed for Orthodox Christmas by staging attacks on Ukrainian cities. And in another development, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says he remains convinced of the need to coordinate weapons deliveries to Ukraine with allies as pressure mounts on Berlin to send Kyiv its Leopard 2 battle tanks. Scholz, who has often underscored the importance of not escalating the conflict in Ukraine or giving Russia a reason to deem it party to the war, said the Western allies have spent a long time preparing and discussing and organizing this. Kyiv has also requested heavier vehicles such as the Leopards, which would represent a significant step up in Western support to Ukraine. Germany has become one of Ukraine's top military supporters in response to Russia's invasion after last year, overcoming a taboo that is rooted in its bloody 20th century history on sending weapons to conflict zones. Still, critics say Scholz and his ruling SPD are too slow, waiting for allies to act instead of assuming Germany's responsibility as the Western power closest to Ukraine. Let's head on now to Russia as the Defense Ministry announces a Russian warship armed with hypersonic cruise weapons has held exercises in the Norwegian Sea. Just last week, President Vladimir Putin sent the frigate to the Atlantic Ocean armed with new generation hypersonic cruise missiles, a signal to the West that Russia will not back down over what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine. In a video conference with the defense minister and commander of the vessel, President Putin said he was sure that Zircon hypersonic missiles would be able to protect Russia from any external threats. A target of a hypersonic weapon is much more difficult to calculate than for intercontinental ballistic missiles because of their maneuverability. But the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu says the country will continue to develop nuclear triad of ballistic missiles, submarines and strategic bombers because such weapons are the main guarantee of its sovereignty. He also says Russia will increase the combat capabilities of the aerospace forces, both in terms of the work of fighters and bombers in areas where modern air defense systems are in operation and in terms of improving unmanned aerial vehicles. And speaking of the ceasefire earlier on, the Kremlin says Ukraine and the West had reacted cynically to a 36-hour ceasefire proposed by the Russian president to mark the Orthodox Christmas. This was revealed by Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov during a conference with journalists earlier today. He reiterated that the truce was announced for humanitarian purposes so that Orthodox Christians could celebrate Christmas. Ukraine, however, says Russian troops shelled dozens of positions and settlements along the front line on Saturday when the truce was meant to be in effect. Let's bring in the VOA's Anna Chernikova. She joins us from Kyiv. Anna, great to see you, and a Happy New Year. Not sure we've seen this year. But let's talk about the truce that was supposed to have held over the weekend, the Orthodox Christmas weekend. It seemed a kind gesture by the Russian president. What has President Putin ever seen as a person or a man of faith?
Good evening and happy 2023. To be honest, reaction in Ukraine to this proposal of so-called ceasefire for Christmas, for Orthodox Christmas, was definitely not taken seriously because, the Ukrainians unfortunately have, this more than 8 years, almost 9 years of experience with Russia, with war with Russia, in war with Russia, and so many times previously as well, different kind of ceasefires or anything like, good fate were announced and never happened and never took place. So definitely this was not something, again, here in Ukraine, it was not considered as any goodwill or any good maneuver. It was only considered as additional, possibility for Russia to save some time in order to prepare for another attack. And also as a certain, propaganda scene to kind of show that Russia is very religious country and, let's say, put religious over anything. But again, Ukrainians remember very well this last Easter, one of the main holiday for all religious people, when Russian forces were shelling the whole territory of Ukraine and air raid sirens were across Ukraine. So definitely this was something that, it was something strategic for Russia, for President Putin to announce in order to, first of all, create this image of goodwill and very strong religious country. And secondly, to, kind of say that, look, we proposed something, but you didn't want a ceasefire, so you are bad, we are good. So this was considered something like this. And unfortunately, from the very morning on January 6th, attacks and missile strikes and shelling were going on in different parts of Ukraine, and air raid siren as well was on across Ukraine. So definitely this was not something that was meant to happen.
Yeah, you make a great point with Easter there, which is around the war started just before, the Easter holidays, and he did not observe a ceasefire during that time. But Ukraine and Russia do share almost the same history when it comes to the Orthodox faith. But there were still attacks, as you mentioned, over the weekend of the so-called, violating the so-called ceasefire. And Russia said it will continue to develop nuclear weapons. Do you feel the worst is yet to come?
Well, you can never be sure that Russia would not cross certain new line. And of course, the risk is always present. Of course, here in Ukraine, people do not really, have these conversations every day that nuclear bomb or nuclear missile could be used. Of course, this is one of the discussions on the top level, and one of the discussions, within the society as a potential reaction by Russia in case Ukrainians have much greater success on the battlefield. But again, I cannot say that most of people believe that Russia actually will use the nuclear weapon against Ukraine in Ukraine, or even if tactical nuclear weapons would be used here in Ukraine. People and also experts are saying that this would mean this would be very negative for Russia, first of all, and also we hear the reaction from the US and from the international partners from Europe that in case of use of nuclear, even tactical nuclear weapons, the answer would be immediate. So to be honest, in terms of nuclear weapon use, for the moment, there is no panic in Ukraine. And to be honest, it doesn't really look like this is happening anytime soon. But again, as I already said, the risk is always present because Russia is a very unexpected country, and decisions that Russian top officials and not only President Putin, but also military officials could take, cannot be predicted 100%. But again, in case of any nuclear activity, I think that we would be hearing from the US, from European intelligence, and I don't think that this could happen unexpectedly. If this would be something that Russia is planning, it looks like that this conversation would be on very actively across the world.
Interesting. And this morning, the UK's Defence Ministry said that Russian troops are about taking full control of the salt mining town of Soledar. How important will this be for Russia, and how much of a loss will it be to Ukraine?
Well, the city of Soledar is very strategic place. So just for the understanding, the main battle is happening now around Bakhmut, which is Donetsk region, and which is very, it's very important point for Russian forces to take control of, because as they have this, strategic goal to take control of the whole Donetsk region. So the city, for the moment, Russian forces cannot take over the city of Bakhmut directly. So in order to, and for the moment, again, according to what we hear from Ukrainian officials, from military officials, and also from international intelligence, particularly British intelligence, that apparently Russian forces changed their tactics, and they're trying now to get to Bakhmut through the city of Soledar. The city of Soledar located around 20 kilometers away from Bakhmut, from other side. And from one of the sides. And this city is important for both sides. For the moment, at least this is the latest what we hear, that apparently Russian forces actually control the most part of the city, but not, they don't have, for now, a complete control. However, Russian forces have control of one of the main roads, which is the main supply chain for Ukrainian forces for the moment. And actually, this road is a great supply chain for both sides. So whoever is controlling this road have certain advantage in this area. So this is very important for supplies, and very, very important in order to actually take over the city of Bakhmut. And what is also important, that the city of Soledar is famous for its salt production, and it has a lot of salt mines. And this salt mines, they're very, it's huge. It's like around hundreds of kilometers underground. And this also could be used as a very, as a great path for the advance for both sides. So both Russian forces and Ukrainian forces could use these mines in order to move and advance forward. So definitely, if we look in general at this general picture of Donbas battle, which is happening at this point of time, the city of Soledar is very strategic to get to Bakhmut. However, it not gives a guarantee of taking over Bakhmut for any for both sides. Ukrainians still control the city of Bakhmut. Ukrainians still control part of Soledar. But Russian forces had a lot of success recently in the recent days around Soledar. So we will see how the situation would change. But again, according to Ukrainian military, Ukrainians still have a chance to change the situation. But it is very tough. And President Zelensky, particularly in his latest evening speech yesterday, he described situation around Soledar as madness. As something that just waves of people waves of Russian soldiers are coming again, and a lot of casualties from both sides, but particularly from Russian side, because too many people are involved in this attack. So for Russia, this is a very strategic point, and not only strategic in terms of military analysis, but also politically strategic, because if they take over Soledar, then they can say that they had certain success and advance in the whole Donbas region.
I doubt if there are any populations left in Soledar as we speak, except the soldiers on both sides. Anna, thanks again for speaking with us, and do stay safe.
Thank you.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says Russia is mobilizing troops for the war in Ukraine and should not be underestimated. He made the comments at a news conference with the EU leaders Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel. Stoltenberg called on members of the military alliance and the EU to be prepared for the long haul. Von der Leyen herself said the European Union would impose new sanctions on Belarus as it keeps up the pressure on Moscow to end the conflict and extends measures to those countries that support Russia. The comments come after leaders of NATO and EU met in Brussels to sign a joint declaration on EU-NATO cooperation earlier today.
The aim is, of course, to ensure that we can continue and also strengthen our support to Ukraine, because we have seen that Russia has suffered big losses in Ukraine due to the brave Ukrainian soldiers and the professionalism and the dedication of the Ukrainian armed forces, but we should not underestimate Russia. They are mobilizing more troops. They are working hard to acquire more equipment, more ammunition, and they have shown a willingness to actually suffer but continue the war. And there is no indication that President Putin has changed the overall aim of his brutal war against Ukraine. So we need to be prepared for the long haul.
The European Union will keep doing everything in its power to support the brave people of Ukraine. We will keep the pressure on the Kremlin for as long as it takes with a biting sanctions regime. We will extend these sanctions to those who militarily support Russia's war, such as Belarus or Iran. And we will be coming forward with new sanctions on Belarus, answering their Belarus role in this Russian war in Ukraine.